Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to D4, D&D Deep Dive. This is the show where each week we take a deep dive into one, sometimes two, specific character builds for Dungeons & Dragons. We theorycraft about them, we crunch numbers about them, not so that I can tell you the right way or the best way to play a character, but to explore one potential way to build and play a character, with the hopes of creating something that is both really powerful, but also really fun to play. So if you enjoy creating characters for D&D almost as much as you enjoy playing the actual game itself, or if you're just looking for tips or ideas on how to build and play something you're thinking about doing, then welcome home. This is where you belong, and I am so glad you're here. My name's Colby. If you would be interested in getting a cheat sheet, a written step-by-step guide to help you recreate this character without having to go back and rewatch the video or take notes, then I think you should seriously consider joining the channel as a member. There should be a little button down there. For just $2 a month, you get access to the library of write-ups that I create for each of these builds that would help you do just that, and also it can just be a nice way to help support the channel. Huge shout out and thank you to my channel members. You guys are so fantastic, and for everybody else, you're also so fantastic. Just watching and liking and especially subscribing and commenting are also great ways to support the channel. So thanks for being here, and let's get going. Question: which character classes are the most powerful in D&D 5e? Weapon users or spellcasters? Well, that depends. I mean, what are you trying to accomplish with your character? What role are they trying to fill in-game? No, just no. It's spellcasters. I mean, come on. As much as I kind of hate to admit it, being a bit of a martial lover myself, generally speaking, characters who can cast spells in D&D really just kind of have a leg up on the power scale when compared to those who cannot. I mean, that's why I love to build so many Gishes, right? Because I want weapon users who can also cast spells. Now, sure, there may be exceptions to the rule. Maybe for some certain utility roles and things, non-spellcasters might be able to fare as well, arguably. But by and large, spells just kind of make you better at just about everything you would want to do in D&D. Why is that? Is it because you can do so much more damage as a spellcaster? No, not really. In fact, very often when I build characters who are primarily or completely spellcasters who are focused on damage, and thus using their highest level spell slots for damage, I'm very often saying something apologetic like, yeah, you might be crazy for doing this, but in the interest of exploring the possible damage-wise, let's pretend you're spending your 1 5th level spell slot to upcast Scorching Ray, instead of doing what you probably should do with it, which is cast Wall of Force, right? Because, yeah, just totally taking enemies out of a fight for several rounds or longer is almost always a more tactically sound decision than doing a little bit more damage. It might not be more fun for you necessarily, depending on whether or not you're a number-crunching murder hobo glory hog. But if you're not, it could be just as, if not more fun, to do all of the things that those powerful control and counter-altering spells can allow you to do if you would just stop worrying about your DPR so much. So, okay, fine, challenge accepted. Let's build a character who uses all of their best spell slots in combat for what we should probably be using them for anyway, battlefield control. It wouldn't be the first time I've ever done so. My favorite control-focused character to date, and arguably the most powerful character I've ever built, honestly, is the control freak, I think, who did 0 damage as far as I was concerned. But, I mean, if we're focused on control with our spell slots, and importantly, I'll say our concentration as well, does that mean we have to give up on the dream of doing decent damage as a spellcaster? I mean, not exactly, but kind of. Of course, there are exceptions to that rule too. You will have moments where a well-placed fireball can be devastating in a combat encounter, or maybe even a disintegrate or something like that, but if we're saving most or all of our spell slots and our concentration for control, that means we're mostly just left with cantrips for damage, which are those 0 resource cost spells that most casters get access to, which can just be used round after round, right? Okay. In that case, what if we focused on building a character who only used cantrips for damage, leaving both our concentration and our spell slots available for control, support, utility, etc. If we focused exclusively on cantrips for damage, could we find enough ways to augment and enhance our damage to make it competitive, or at least almost competitive, with other damage-focused builds? Sure, Eldritch Blast, Agonizing Blast, Hex. Next. No. I've done a ton of Eldritch Blast builds. I want a different kind of caster here. Someone who is primarily a wizard, I think, since they have access to the best spell lists in the game, so all those juicy control and utility spells would be available to us. Fine. Bladesinger, Booming Blade, or Green Flame Blade? No! I've done plenty of Bladesingers and Gishes. I love them, but again, I want something different today. A real stand far away from the melee, divide and conquer the enemy while we help take out the leftovers from range with the strongest cantrip I can muster kind of character. And thus, for the build this week, I'm going to give myself 3 rules. 1. We can only use cantrips to do damage. 2. No Eldritch Blast or Blade Trips, Green Flame Blade, Booming Blade, allowed. And 3, we cannot use our concentration to help increase our damage. I want to preserve that to allow us to concentrate on those devastating control spells that make casters so dang powerful in the first place. Now, I'll mention briefly here that though we'll be using cantrips for damage, which are sustainable by nature since they require no resources to use, I am going to be building this character for burst or nova damage, and multi-target damage at that. Most of what we do will benefit our sustained cantrip damage as well, but there are just a couple of things that we can do to give us some decent multi-target nova damage too, using only cantrips. So it felt like a fun way to still follow these rules that I've arbitrarily created for myself, but still give us some decent burst damage potential. Which, I mean, that's kind of what every wizard wants to be doing anyway, right? Control and be a blaster once in a while. Okay, are you ready? I proudly present episode 125, For Whom the Bell Tolls? Nah, it's catchy, but not very descriptive. The Cantrip Specialist. Hell's bells. Ring that dinger. Okay, fine. How about just the Cantrip Blaster? It's a little boring, but at least it gets to the point. And check out this fantastic artwork by my good friend Randall Hampton that he created for this character concept. He does this every week, and they're always amazing, and this week's no exception. Perfectly on point. If you would be interested in following Randall to see the other artwork that he's done, or maybe even reach out to commission him to create some art for your character, or for your entire party even, I will, as always, put links in the video description on how to do so. Thanks, Randall. Before we jump in, really quick, I wanted to read you guys the description that the team over at dScryb came up with for this character concept, since they are, again, the sponsor for the video this week. Spectral bells resound in a discordant cacophony as the hooded figure stalks across the battlefield, their dark eyes fixed as if in a trance. Writhing foes collapse in their wake, blood dribbling between fingers as hands desperately try to muffle the sonorous, rupturing peals. At the enigmatic traveler's hip churn several luminescent, viscous liquids in round, bulbous flasks, each marked with a black skull. Yes! So good. So, for those who don't know, dScryb is a fantastic tool that both DMs and players alike can use to get professionally written descriptions of almost anything you can imagine wanting a professionally written description for in a role-playing game, D&D or otherwise. I'm talking settings, characters, attacks, dialogue, magic items, spells, and much, much more. With even a free dScryb account, you can get access to thousands of searchable descriptions in their massive library that grows every single day. And I mean, in case you've forgotten, the writers that dScryb has on their team are absolute professionals. Many of them used to work for Wizards of the Coast themselves, and they're adding to their amazing team of writers all the time. And yes, as many of you know, they provide so much more than just that box text-like description. You know, recently I've been highlighting the new Sonic library, which is amazing in that it allows you to add fantastic ambient sound to so many of the descriptive scenes that they've already got in place, as well as the fantastic maps that are VTT ready and replete with descriptions both of the map itself as well as individual locations within each map. One thing that I haven't talked about in a long time is the character illustrations that you can get via dScryb. Getting your character illustrated comes with a cost that's in addition to any subscription you might have, but they truly have partnered with some of the very best illustrators in the fantasy world. And there are a lot of different illustration options that you can choose for your character that come in a variety of price points: black and white or color, bust or full body, background or no background. How cool would it be to immortalize your favorite D&D character with not only a professionally written description of them, which you can get with a hero level dScryb subscription, and a gorgeous illustration of them to boot? Anyway, at the very least, you should absolutely have a free account to check out what's available to you for no cost. When you do so, please use this website, dScryb.com/D4. That's how they know I sent you. And yes, if you decide to purchase a subscription, make sure to use the promo code D4 at checkout to save 10%. Big thanks to dScryb. You guys rock. Let's jump into the build. All right. At level 1, for our starting class on this character, when we first meet our champion, they are a cleric. But you see, they're a death cleric, and I don't think they're very happy about it. They went through this goth phase as a teenager, super into death back when it was cool, but they've kind of realized that they're just not as into the occult anymore as they used to be, and now I think they want out. Now, okay, I don't know if I'd necessarily make this something humorous like this on my own version of this character if I were actually playing them in game, but I might. And regardless, I do kind of like the idea of this character who's finding themselves in a place with their spirituality where they aren't happy where they're at and they're looking to make a change. Question is, if you decided to go that route with this character's story, would your DM make you give up your clerical powers? If you totally renounced the god of death that you have up to this point in your life been following? Could you somehow pull a fast one on your deity and keep the power that they've given you but secretly be working against them somehow? I don't know, but I think it could definitely make for an interesting character concept and story arc. Regardless of your reasons though, yes, we're starting off as cleric. As for our race, we're gonna go with old reliable here and pick variant human. There are actually 2 feats that I need to make this build work the way that I want it to, and starting off with one of those for free is just hard to beat mechanically. Neither of the feats that I'm gonna be taking are half feats, so in those situations I tend to prefer variant human over custom lineage to get a +1 to 2 ability scores as opposed to +2 to 1, right? Feel free to go a different route for your race, of course, if you prefer, especially if you already get a free feat at your table. Just know that without a free feat, you're not going to be as strong during your Nova round for several levels. Your call. As for that free feat that we're going to be choosing, I'm going to go with Metamagic Adept. I would love to just take 3 levels of Sorcerer instead of taking this feat, but frankly, we're not going to have the ability scores to multi-class into Sorcerer. We're going to be plenty mad as is, multiple ability score dependent, nor do we have the time to give up 3 character levels to get there. For those who don't know, Metamagic Adept lets us learn 2 metamagic options from the Sorcerer's metamagic list and gives us 2 sorcery points to spend on the metamagic options that we choose, which we get back on a long rest. As for the metamagic options we should choose, I'm going with, Quicken Spell, which will let us cast a spell that normally has a casting time of 1 action as a bonus action instead. And as for the other option, I'd say pick your favorite, but I think I would probably take Subtle Spell here to let me occasionally cast a spell with verbal or somatic components, which can be really clutch in a pinch. As for our ability scores, I'm assuming that we're going with the point buy method as always, and would say let's go with a 15 intelligence, taking one of our +1s there, a 13 constitution and our other +1 there, then a 14 dexterity and a 13 wisdom. Yeah, I told you we'd be mad. For starting equipment, really, I'd just go standard stuff here, you know, scale mail, shield, etc. Probably the main reason I wanted to start cleric was so that we could have medium armor and shield proficiency right from the get-go, though getting our subclass right at level 1 was also a big motivator because, yes, as I've mentioned, I want to go with Death Cleric here for our Divine Domain, which clerics get at level 1. I think the only other time I've used Death Cleric in a build was all the way back when I built my Death Cleric character, which, if I remember right, was a full Death Cleric, no multiclassing, which is a rarity for me. as a Death Cleric, we get the Reaper feature, which is really great and the main reason that we are here. Reaper, first off, lets you learn one Necromancy cantrip from any spell list, but honestly, I'm probably just taking Spare the Dying here, which is already available to clerics. Spare the Dying is a nice way to stabilize a dying creature if you're out of other healing options, and all the other necromancy cantrips are better with a high wisdom score, since they would be considered cleric spells, and thus use our wisdom modifier for the plus to hit or spell save DC, right? And our wisdom kind of sucks. So I say go with something that just works regardless. But the most important aspect of the Reaper feature, of course, is this. When we cast a necromancy cantrip that normally only targets one creature, the spell instead targets two creatures, as long as they are within 5 feet of each other. That within 5 feet of each other is a bit of a bummer. It can be fairly restrictive, but when you can be targeting two enemies in this way, it's really nice and something that we will be trying to do during our Nova round. One important thing to note here, this feature does not say when you cast a cleric cantrip. The only requirements are that the cantrip be a necromancy cantrip that normally targets only one creature. Remember that. As for the other spells that we should take at Cleric 1 here, Death Clerics get False Life and Ray of Sickness for free, neither of which are amazing necessarily, though False Life I can definitely see using for a nice little source of temporary hit points on yourself. Otherwise, I think I'm going to pick up the usual suspects from the Cleric spell list. Guidance for some decent utility to help out you or one of your allies on skill checks. Bless for one of the best buffs in the game, which I'm definitely using my concentration for at these early levels. So 3 of my party members can add a d4 to all of our attacks and saving throws. And yeah, Healing Word so that I can heal an injured party member from range and with a bonus action. But at level 2, yes, we are leaving Cleric behind as we have either seen the error of our ways or, perhaps we've simply been tasked by our God of Death to operate undercover, as it were, pretending to be part of another order, another class, while still seeking to carry out our divine mandate from them in a different guise. Regardless of your reasons, we are taking wizard levels here. And yes, as I said at the beginning, this character is going to be more of a wizard than anything else. A caster's caster for the most part. So at Wizard 1, we get Arcane Recovery, which tells us that once per day, after a short rest, we can recover spent spell slots equal to half our wizard level, rounded up. Always handy. And then we get first level wizard spells and cantrips, and while yes, of course you should get the usual suspects like shield and absorb elements for defense, silvery barbs for all around usefulness, maybe sleep for control at early levels anyway, but the one that I want to focus on here is the thing that will be our bread and butter during our Nova round and frankly for sustained damage as well, and it is, you guessed it, Toll the Dead. Toll the Dead is the highest damage cantrip in the game outside of Eldritch Blast and the Blade Trips if you build to really take advantage of those cantrips, as I've said. And as I've said, I'm intentionally avoiding those cantrips, so as a cantrip specialist, Toll the Dead is really the next best option available, especially with all of the ways that we are going to be getting to buff it. With Toll the Dead, you cast it as an action and then your target has to make a wisdom saving throw. If they fail, they take 1d8 damage or 1d12 damage so long as they're not at full health. We'll be assuming that our target is not at full health when we crunch the numbers, which, yes, is going to mean that you might not want to go Nova right on round 1, preferring to wait until you can target enemies that have already taken a little bit of damage so that we can get more mileage out of the spell. That's okay. We are, remember, a control-focused character who will probably, more often than not, be leading with a powerful control spell option instead of damage in order to divide the battlefield for our allies and make life a little easier for all of us, like a good caster should do, right? So yes, Toll the Dead is a necromancy cantrip, and thus, thanks to our Reaper feature, when we cast it, we can hit 2 targets with it so long as they're standing next to each other, even though it's a wizard cantrip. And that's fantastic for us since our intelligence is so much better than our wisdom and will continue to be so throughout our career. At level 3, we would be a wizard 2, and that means we get our arcane tradition, our wizard subclass. And I'm going to recommend going with evocation. I love evokers. There's just something about playing a wizard who is a quintessential blaster. And yeah, that's pretty much what evocation wizards are. I don't actually use them all that often. The last time might have been in my ultimate blaster build from quite a ways back, but they are really fun, super straightforward, and are arguably the best multi-target damage dealers in the game. Light Cleric says, "Hold my fireball." Now, we get 2 features as an evoker. First up, Evocation Savant, which basically makes it easier and cheaper to copy an evocation spell into your spellbook. I hope you find that useful sometime. But the real gem at this level, of course, is the Sculpt Spells feature, which tells us that when we cast an evocation spell with an area of effect, we can choose 1 plus the spell's level number of creatures to automatically succeed at the saving throw against it, and they take no damage for that spell, even if the spell normally does half damage on a save. If you're going to be slinging fireballs or lightning bolt, etc., it's tough to beat this feature because usually we have to be really careful about where we place a huge 20-foot radius spell like fireball so as to not hurt our friends, and thus we will often avoid hitting as many enemies as would otherwise be possible, right? With Sculpt Spells, we can just let fly in order to impact the maximum number of bad guys without worrying most of the time where our allies are standing in relation to the area of effect. Super great. At level 4, we would be a wizard 3, and that means we get 2nd level spells. You should of course be considering Misty Step among the other great 2nd level spells, but the ones that I want to concentrate on and will be focusing on throughout the build are the really strong control and or sometimes utility options. So for 2nd level spells, I think the front runners are first up, Web, which covers a 20-foot cube with sticky webs that can potentially restrain our enemies for multiple rounds. It's maybe the best of the bunch here, I think, but also worth considering, of course, our Hold Person, which, though it only works on humanoids and only targets 1 creature, it can be upcast to target multiple enemies, and if they fail their save against it, of course they are paralyzed, which is just a devastating condition to inflict. A third one worth considering, I think, is Suggestion, which, though it might not be quite as devastating in combat for an enemy as being restrained or paralyzed, it can potentially just totally remove an enemy from a combat encounter for up to 8 hours, which I think in most campaigns for most combat encounters most often will really just mean indefinitely, right? Depending on what suggestion you put into your enemy's head and how far from the battle it takes them. Actually, I'm curious to know, how many of you have seen Suggestion used successfully at your table, only to have the enemy who fell under the sway of the Suggestion spell return later on at some point, whether 8 hours later or just several days later, whatever, in the campaign, to try and finish the job that they had originally started? I bet there are some pretty great and maybe even hilarious stories out there. So please share with the group in the comment section. I'd love to hear them. At level 5, now that we've got some really great control spells under our belt, we're going to step away from Wizard for a bit. Our character has found that while their mastery of the arcane and the divine is top-notch, their physical acumen is just not quite up to snuff. Perhaps we experienced a near-fatal combat encounter that's filled us with a desire to improve our stamina and endurance so as to avoid another such catastrophe in the future. Whatever your reasons, yeah, we're taking fighter levels here. It's a burst damage build, you knew it was coming. Obviously, you do not have to do this, and especially if you're less concerned about your Nova or burst damage than I am as a slave to the spreadsheet, feel free to skip fighter altogether and just keep going wizard to get to those better spells and spell slots. Also, some of you may be asking, if we're taking fighter levels eventually, why not start fighter so that we can get constitution saving throw proficiency and thus vastly improve our concentration checks, among other things. I would have, but to take the Metamagic Adept feat, you have to be a spellcaster, and I really wanted Quicken Spell right at the beginning for Nova damage purposes. Feel free to delay Metamagic Adept if you must in the name of better defense, but anyway, we're here now, And thus, at Fighter 1, we get Second Wind, which lets us heal ourselves for a few hit points once per short rest with a bonus action, and then we get a fighting style. And I'm going to say we ought to take defense here. It gives us a +1 to our AC, and you know, assuming we have half plate at this point, which we might not, admittedly, it's 750 gold, but then plus a shield and our +2 dexterity modifier, with the defense fighting style, we'd be sitting at a 20 armor class. That's the equivalent of full plate and a shield, right? And that's kind of awesome for a mostly caster character, yeah? Don't forget also, at character level 5 here, Toll the Dead bumps up to 2d12 per target. And since we are ideally hitting 2 targets when we cast it, that's 4d12 per casting. Not bad, little cantrip. Not bad. But at level 6, we would be a fighter 2, and that means we get Action Surge, and yes, it's the main reason that we're here. This means that once per short rest, we get to take 2 actions on our turn instead of 1. And don't forget how this interacts with spells. The rules state that if we cast a spell as a bonus action, regardless of what the spell is, then the only other spells we can cast on our turn are cantrips with a casting time of 1 action. No worries for us as a cantrip specialist, but if we wanted to break my self-imposed rules here once in a while and say cast a fireball once we have it, then action surge and cast another fireball for some much improved area of effect multi-target nova damage, we can 100% do that, so long as we don't try to cast a spell, any spell, cantrip or leveled spell, doesn't matter, with our bonus action, right? Okay. At level 6, it is time for our first damage report. So let's discuss what our Nova round looks like at the moment. First off, as I've said, yes, I imagine that on round we're going to be throwing out a web or a hold person or suggestion to get our all-important control going. You could, of course, just start bursting, but I'd probably only do so if I were kind of low down on the initiative order, so that our allies have had a chance to soften up a couple of baddies already. But then on round 2, or even later, if need be, assuming we've got 2 enemies standing within 5 feet of each other, and hey, no reason they couldn't be 2 enemies that are stuck inside of our web, right? That might be the easiest way to set this up, in fact. But we would quicken spell and use our bonus action to hit both of those enemies with Toll the Dead. We would then use our action to Toll the Dead again, no conflict since it's a cantrip, and then, you guessed it, Action Surge and Toll the Dead a 3rd time, meaning that if both of those enemies failed their saving throw every time, and don't forget, Toll the Dead requires a wisdom save, and that's a pretty great saving throw for us to be targeting for most enemies in D&D 5e. Each target would have taken 6d12 damage for a grand total of 12d12 necrotic damage during our Nova round. And thus, against enemies with a +0 to their wisdom save, we would on average do 51 damage here. And against enemies with a +5 to their wisdom save, it would be 31 damage. Okay, so compared to other multi-target Nova builds that I've done to date, we're probably doing less damage than all of them. But there are 2 huge giant asterisks to attach to the numbers. 1, we are exclusively targeting wisdom saving throws for our damage, not armor class, not constitution or strength or even dexterity, but wisdom. You know how many enemies you're going to be fighting at this level with a really great wisdom saving throw? Very, very few. And in fact, my spreadsheet really shows its weakness here as I calculate all the way up to a +15 to wisdom saves. And there's just no way that you're going to be fighting anything with even half of that at this level. So in reality, the damage arc should look a lot flatter than it actually shows. That's fine. Mathematical models have their uses, but they're not always perfect. Generally speaking, I think you can expect to do much closer to the high end of the damage chart here. And there's even a decent chance that you'll run into enemies with a negative modifier to their wisdom save, meaning you could do even better than what we're showing. The second asterisk, of course, is this. We're doing all of this damage with cantrips, and without even using our concentration, meaning that we will be free to exert all of that lovely battlefield control that full casters are so great at. Okay, fine. Third asterisk, we only hit these levels of damage if we're targeting 2 enemies and they have to be standing next to each other. So we're not going to just be able to do that whenever we want. But again, I'm okay with that because the most powerful thing that we're doing here is shutting down the bad guys. The damage is really kind of just gravy. And if we don't go Nova until 2 or 3 rounds in, it's not as painful for us as it is for those characters whose most valuable asset that they bring to the fight is the damage they can do, right? We are smoking right now, and it's only going to get better. At level 7, we definitely need to go back to Wizard here for a bit at least to get some more potent control spells and also a very important evocation feature. So we would be a Wizard 4, and that means our first ability score increase or feat. I think we got to bump intelligence, bringing it to an 18. That's kind of a no-brainer since increasing the likelihood of enemies failing their save against our spells is the best thing we can do both for our damage and for our control. At level 8, we would be a Wizard 5, and that means 3rd level wizard spells, which are among the best in the game as far as I'm concerned for their level. First off, yes, we are an evocation wizard who loves to do multi-target burst damage, so we gotta grab Fireball here for big booms, which we can sculpt around our allies. And of course, things like Counterspell and Dispel Magic and Fly should all be considered. But the 3 best control options here are, I think, first up, Hypnotic Pattern, which is cast in a 30-foot cube and can potentially incapacitate multiple enemies. The one weakness of Hypnotic Pattern is that the spell effect ends if they take damage or if an ally of theirs uses an action to kind of shake them out of their stupor, right? Still, they don't get to save again after they fail their initial saving throw, so potentially very potent. Fear is another great one here, which you cast in a 30-foot cone and causes enemies who fail their save to drop what they're holding. They become frightened, so disadvantage on attacks and saves while they can see you, and they can't move closer to you, and then they have to use their turn to dash away from you, and they don't get to make a saving throw to end the spell effect until they're out of your line of sight, so like if they run around a corner. Depending on the room and where your enemies are standing and who you're fighting, this might be a more powerful spell than Hypnotic Pattern. My 3rd and final favorite of the control options here is Slow. It doesn't provide as much hard control as the other 2, but situationally it could be better, especially if you're fighting enemies who are immune to being frightened or charmed, right? With Slow, you simply choose up to 6 enemies in a massive 40-foot cube area, and if they fail their save, they have a -2 to their armor class and dex saves. Nice setup for Fireball. They move at half speed. They can't take reactions, and on their turn they have to choose between an action or a bonus action, and regardless, can't make more than 1 attack during their turn. It can even potentially delay their spell casting. This one might be able to get even more enemies than the other 2, and it can't be shaken off or saved against again after the initial fail, and just puts a whole bunch of negative conditions on the bad guys that is going to make everyone on your team so happy. At level 9, we would be a Wizard 6, and as an evocation wizard, that means we get Potent Cantrip. This is actually the main reason I wanted to go evocation for our subclass. As a cantrip specialist, Potent Cantrip says that when a creature succeeds on a saving throw against our damaging cantrips, and yeah, doesn't specify evocation cantrips only, thank goodness, then they still take half damage from it. And you know what? It's kinda hard to overstate the power of this feature, honestly. Something that not a lot of people realize, I think, is just how powerful taking half damage on a spell is. I think Pack Tactics even did a video on this a while ago, showing the math on how good half damage on spells is. I mean, with weapon users and those casting spells that require a spell attack roll, if you miss, the target takes 0 damage. With spells that are save or suck, things like Disintegrate, for example, and cantrips otherwise, if the enemy makes their save, they take no damage. But with Potent Cantrip, we have something that just guarantees damage. And it's usable on spells that are resource free. Doesn't matter what the enemy's bonus to their saving throw is. Doesn't matter what our spell save DC might be. Unless the enemy's immune to necrotic damage, in the case of Toll the Dead, they're just going to take damage. And of course, if they are immune to necrotic, we could always switch to a different cantrip, right? For a character who has the self-imposed rule of only being able to do damage with cantrips, this ability is a bit of a must-have, and arguably something we should have tried to get to sooner. The numbers just look quite a bit better with Reaper from Cleric and Action Surge from Fighter than it would be just as a Wizard 6 doing half damage to a single target, right? But I wouldn't fault you for beelining to Wizard 6 here, for the record. Okay, at level 9, it's time for our next damage report. Since last check, we've increased our intelligence modifier for a better spell save DC, and more importantly, picked up Potent Cantrip to guarantee at least half damage on those castings of Toll the Dead. Not to mention all of the much improved control options we got with 3rd level wizard spells, right? But anyway, against enemies now with a +0 to their wisdom save, we would on average do 68 damage during our Nova round, and against enemies with a +6 to their wisdom save, it would be 56 damage on average. Notice how much smaller the drop is as the save goes up. That is thanks to Potent Cantrip. And yes, while this damage is less damage than I'm showing for other multi-target Nova damage builds that I've built to date at this level, keep in mind that we are only targeting 2 enemies, while most of those other builds were targeting 3. So damage per enemy, we're actually a lot closer, or in one case anyway, better off, depending on the enemy armor class or their dexterity save versus their wisdom save, etc. And again, just cantrips here. No concentration. Kind of awesome. But at level 10, now that we've got those fantastic 3rd level wizard spells and that all-important Potent Cantrip feature, I want to take yet another class here. You might think that's too much, and again, if you just decide to stick with wizard, I wouldn't blame you. 4th and 5th level wizard spells would be coming soon, and they are pretty fantastic. But as for us, we're going to take some artificer levels right now, and I have no idea why, story-wise. You tell me. This character has decided to take their arcane knowledge and skill and to begin to use it to imbue their own creations with magic to better serve themselves and or their party, to better harm their enemies. Maybe this is somehow all in the great design of their god of death. Now, like Fighter, if you're going to end up with Artificer levels, you might have wanted to consider starting Artificer also, for again, Constitution saving throw proficiency and thus better concentration checks. Doing so still would have allowed us to get the Metamagic Adept feat at level 1. It just would have slowed down our wizard progression, which felt super important to me. Not to mention that it felt just a little clumsier from a concept and story perspective to start with a level of Artificer and then take a single level Death Cleric dip and then go wizard. But maybe you've got a great idea for a story arc that would go that route. If so, let me know. But as an Artificer 1, we get first up Magical Tinkering. It's a nice little utility feature that allows us to turn a non-magical tiny object into something that emits a sound or a visual effect or a light or even a recorded message. Nice little bit of utility. And then of course we get Artificer spells. I would focus here on taking things that Artificers have access to, but wizards don't. There aren't a lot, but Thorn Whip is one for cantrips. It's kind of nice in case you need to like pull an enemy that's 30 feet away from you, 10 feet closer to kind of get into range of your area of effect, or maybe to let you double up on Toll the Dead next round, hopefully. I'd grab Cure Wounds, which, though not really as useful as Healing Word in that it requires both a touch and our action to cast, it does, as an Artificer spell, heal more than our Cleric spells, since it benefits from our Intelligence modifier instead of Wisdom, right? So, a little more healing there. And then there's Fairy Fire, which not only can potentially give advantage to your allies on their attacks against multiple enemies, but is even an evocation spell, which means we can sculpt it around our friends, and that's awesome. At level 11, we would be an Artificer 2, and that means we get Infuse Item. I love Infuse Item. It lets you take a non-magical item and infuse it to make it magical, and there are tons of infusion options to choose from. We can learn 4 infusions, but can only have 2 active at any one time. We can't repeat any infusion on multiple items, and we can't infuse the same item with multiple infusions. I would plan on using here Enhanced Defense, first of all, which we can put on our shield or our armor to give it a +1 AC, meaning we'd be up to a 21 AC right now, and that's without any other magic items. And then definitely Mind Sharpener, which makes me feel a little less bad for not having Constitution saving throw proficiency, in that it tells us if we fail our concentration check, we can use one of the item's charges, and it has 4 of those and regains 1d4 charges daily to simply succeed at the check instead. That's actually pretty incredible. considering that even if we had a great concentration check bonus, like with advantage, as some subclasses do, or maybe if we took Warcaster, sometimes we just take massive damage and or roll terribly and lose our concentration anyway, right? With this, we just succeed instead, no matter the damage or the roll, at least a few times per day. And that's muy poderoso. Don't forget, at character level 11, Toll the Dead now goes up to 3d12, and that means cast on 2 targets 3 times each. During our Nova round, we're potentially doing 18d12 damage in a single round with only cantrips. Yay. At level 12, we would be an Artificer 3, and that means we get the right tool for the job. This lets us magically create a set of Artisan's tools. Hopefully that comes in handy for you sometime. And then we get our Artificer subclass, our Artificer Specialist, and we are going with... Can you guess? Some of you have already guessed, I'm sure, but the rest of you might be surprised to hear Alchemist. Indeed, that subclass that I've only used one time ever in any other build, the Combat Medic of all things. But this is really fantastic for what we want to be doing here. As an alchemist, we get first up a couple of new spells for free. Ray of Sickness, which we already had as a Death Cleric, but at least it uses our intelligence modifier now if for some strange reason we actually wanted to cast it. And Healing Word, which is fantastic since now we have both of the level 1 heal spells that we can use with our intelligence modifier instead of wisdom for a little more healing, right? But alchemists also get this cool feature called Experimental Elixir. It tells us that after finishing a short rest, we can create an elixir, which we roll on a table for to determine its effects. It can be a healing elixir, it could grant increased move speed or armor class, it could let the drinker add a d4 to attacks and saves for 1 minute, like a bless spell, flight, or even transform the drinker as per the alter self spell. I don't love the roll on a table nature of this ability, but fortunately we can spend a first level spell slot to just make more elixirs, choosing the effect in that case. And the elixir lasts until our next long rest. I love the idea of being able to give somebody flight in a pinch with just a first level spell slot. Or maybe best of all, bless, which actually could stack with the bless spell, giving someone, maybe even multiple party members, 2d4 to all of their attack rolls and saving throws. And that's awesome. Experimental Elixir doesn't do a lot for our Nova round numbers, but it does a ton for our support, utility, and fun. So big bonus in my book. At level 13, we would be an Artificer 4, and that means we get an ability score increase or feat. And as much as I would love to bump our intelligence here, we kind of have to take the Artificer Initiate feat to do what I want to do at next level. Hang on, why would we take the Artificer Initiate feat if we're already an Artificer? Let me explain. See, the feat does a couple of things. It lets us learn an additional Artificer Cantrip and Artificer first level spell. Okay, but not that great. But what is really great is the fact that it gives us proficiency with one type of artisan's tools of our choice. And then, importantly, tells us we can then use that type of tool as a spellcasting focus for any spell that uses intelligence as our spellcasting ability. This is really important, but I need to put a pin in it until we explain why we're taking it next level. Unfortunately, we have to interrupt that explanation because at level 13, it's time for our next damage report. Since last check, the only real increase to our Nova round of damage has been the bump that we got to Toll the Dead, plus our proficiency bonus increase, I guess. But we have done some really nice things to improve our support and utility, not to mention all the additional spell slots we've added by multiclassing into Artificer for more castings and upcastings of our favorite third level wizard spells, which isn't nothing. But at this point, against targets with a +0 to their wisdom save, during our Nova round, we would do 105 damage on average, and against enemies with a +7 to their wisdom save, which is very rare. Let me remind you, we would do 84 damage on average in total. Okay, we're still trailing other multi-target Nova damage builds by a healthy margin at this level, and we still have the huge benefit of only going up against wisdom saves for all of our damage, and only using cantrips and not our concentration, making us a phenomenal battlefield controller. I still love where we're at. At level 14, we would be an Artificer 5. And that means we get second level Artificer spells. And again, I'm going to want to focus here on spells that the wizard doesn't get. So Aid is a great one here to give 3 party members a bump to their maximum hit points, and Lesser Restoration to cure all sorts of conditions and maladies for our friends. We're actually a pretty decent support character at this level. But the main reason we wanted to go Alchemist in the first place is for the Alchemical Savant feature that alchemists get at level 5 Artificer here. I know, 5 levels into Artificer feels like a big investment, but it's not like we haven't gotten other nice benefits along the way in pursuit of more cantrip damage. But now we're here and we get this really fantastic feature. So Alchemical Savant tells us that whenever we cast a spell using our alchemist supplies as the spell focus, we gain a bonus to 1 roll of the spell equal to our intelligence modifier, so long as the spell is either healing or dealing acid, fire, poison, or, you guessed it, necrotic damage. Okay, let's back up a bit here. See, Toll the Dead is not an alchemist or artificer spell, meaning we would not be casting it with our alchemist supplies as the spell focus. This means that if we wanted to get this bump of our intelligence modifier to our Toll the Dead damage from Alchemical Savant, we'd need to find a way to cast the spell with our alchemist supplies. This is the reason we took the Artificer Initiate feat last level, because it tells us that we can use the artisan's tools we chose with the feat as a spellcasting focus for any spell we cast that uses our intelligence modifier. And since we took Toll the Dead not as a cleric spell at level 1, but as a wizard spell at level 2, it qualifies. Are you with me? Now, there is one
teensy weensy itty bitty tiny whiny
problem, potentially. We already had proficiency with alchemist supplies when we took the Artificer Initiate feat, right? We got proficiency with alchemist supplies when we became an alchemist. And the feat says we gain proficiency with a tool of our choice and then can use that tool as a spell focus. Your DM might say, you already have alchemist supplies proficiency, so you have to choose a different artisan tool to be your focus with the Artificer Initiate feat. Personally, if my DM said that to me, I'd be like, whoopsh. Or at the very least, I would give them the most withering eye roll I could possibly muster. I have to believe that 99% of DMs would be like, you want to spend a very precious feat to gain proficiency in a thing you already have proficiency in, so you can use that thing as a spellcasting focus for all of your intelligence-based spells? Yeah, okay, that's fine. But for the 1%ers out there who would not allow it, it means that if we want this to work right, we would need to take Artificer Initiate before we got to Artificer level 3 and became an alchemist, which for the build as we've laid it out would mean way back at character level 7, meaning we would not have bumped intelligence at that level, and that's kind of a bummer. Alternatively, if you didn't care so much about your early game Nova round numbers, you could have taken Artificer Initiate at level 1 instead of Metamagic Adept, right? Finally, something important to consider. Alchemical Savant says we get to add the intelligence modifier to 1 of the spell's damage rolls. Now, if we're casting that same spell multiple times over a round, we do get to add it to each casting. That's nice. But does it mean that both targets hit by Toll the Dead would see this increase to damage, or just one of them? We're told in the player's handbook that if a spell or other effect deals damage to more than one target at the same time, roll the damage once for all of them. The Reaper feature from Death Cleric doesn't exactly specify the timing of the damage here. It says if a cantrip normally targets 1, it can target 2. I'm assuming that most DMs would just have you roll the die once, and that damage is the damage that would be done to both targets, as is typically the case when you're casting a spell that deals damage to multiple enemies at once, right? I can see some DMs ruling the other way, however, and saying roll the damage for this target, then roll the damage for that target. I'm confident they would be the exception, but of course, as with everything, be sure to discuss with your DM beforehand if you're trying to build around this feature. Whew, that was a long sidebar. Okay, at level 15, now that we've got Alchemical Savant and other Artificer goodies in place, the question becomes, how should we finish this character? I think the obvious answer is in Wizard. You could go Cleric for Channel Divinity, among other things. You could go Fighter to pick up a subclass, I suppose. But yeah, we're mostly a caster, and we've got 4th and 5th level Wizard spells waiting for us right around the corner. We said we were here to be a battlefield controller with strong cantrip damage, and I think the best battlefield controllers are generally Wizards. So let's do that. Thus, we would be a Wizard 7, and that means 4th level spells. Too many good ones to go over in detail, but I think the best ones for control purposes are Polymorph, which can not only turn your ally into a giant ape or a Tyrannosaurus Rex, but it can also turn your enemies into a goldfish. And of course you've got Banishment as well, which can just send your enemies into another plane of existence. At level 16, we would be a Wizard 8, and that means we get another ability score increase or feat, and finally, we get to cap our intelligence at 20. Hooray. And then at level 17, we would be a Wizard 9, and we finally get to 5th level Wizard spells. And yes, there are a multitude of great ones, but I think the best spell here for control purposes is the infamous Wall of Force, which just plops an invisible force field around your enemies, and then they're just stuck behind it. No saving throw, no nothing. They can potentially teleport from behind it, of course, if they have teleportation, or like burrow underneath it or fly over it if you make it a wall instead of like a sphere. So try your best to adjust the spell according to the enemies you're fighting. But yeah, for those with no way to get out of it, it is one incredible control spell. Finally, don't forget that Toll the Dead gets its final bump here to 4d12 per casting. And thus, for our final damage report at level 17, since last check, we have capped our intelligence modifier, added the damage from our intelligence modifier to each casting of Toll the Dead, and seen the damage from Toll the Dead increase by another d12. If you add in our intelligence modifier, that means we're doing a total of 24 d12 plus 30 damage during our Nova round. That sounds awesome, right? How often do you get to roll a ton of d12s? And yeah, we've also greatly increased our control and support capabilities and are really just living our best Cantrip Blaster lives. But against enemies here with +0 to their wisdom saves, we would on average do 177 damage in total, and against enemies with a +8 to their wisdom saves, it would be 139 damage on average. And that's the biggest increase that we've seen between damage reports by far. So I certainly hope that you get to play this character well into late game. We are still bringing up the rear compared to other multi-target Nova damage builds that I've done to date, but I still don't really care, since we are way better controllers than all of them. Alright, let's get into final thoughts. Our tier score, if you take the damage that we deal at all the enemy bonuses to wisdom save for each of the 4 damage reports that we reported on and just averaged it all into one big number, it lands us at 75, which yes, puts us well below the previous last place contestant for multi-target Nova damage, the Ascendant Dragon Monk, which I really loved actually. But maybe it would be helpful to consider damage per enemy here, instead of taken as a lump sum, just for fun. Since there's also no guarantee that any of the multi-target characters that I've built would do damage to 3 targets, like I usually would calculate. Thus, for maybe a better apples-to-apples comparison, if you were to go that route and divide all of these characters' damage by the number of targets they were affecting, then the tier score for this character, the average done over their entire career, right, per enemy, would be 37, and the Ascendant Dragon Monk would be a 36. Now, to be fair, that might actually say more about the relative power level of the Ascendant Dragon Monk than it does about this character who can only deal damage with cantrips. But still, I think the point is a valid one. It almost makes me consider redoing my spreadsheet for multi-target builds to reduce the damage to per enemy numbers. Only problem is, I think there's some value to looking at total damage, since this build, for example, can definitely not do damage to more than 2 targets, with cantrips at least, whereas the Evoker or Light Cleric builds are using Fireball and or Spirit Guardians, etc., which have a much larger AoE and thus a really decent likelihood of doing damage to at least 3 enemies, right, if not more. Regardless, at the end of the day, despite the relatively low damage numbers on this build, I love where we ended up with this character. To be honest, I wasn't expecting the burst numbers to even get as high as they did, especially by level 17. Now, sure, we are using some expendable resources in our sorcery points and action surge during that Nova round. But if you didn't have those available, you still could do some okay sustained damage to a couple of targets each round with the help of Potent Cantrip, Alchemical Savant, and Reaper. It wouldn't be anything to write home about necessarily, but I mean, you're looking at 50 to 60 DPR, damage per round, on average, at least against lowish wisdom saving throw enemies anyway. And, you know, if we decided to ignore burst or nova damage altogether, we could get a different feat at level 1, probably Artificer Initiate, and skip fighter levels to get all of our cantrip damage bumps a couple levels quicker to boot, not to mention our intelligence capped sooner, and the higher level spells a little quicker. In the end, though, the thing that's so great about this build is not the damage. It's the fact that we can do respectable damage while still doing most of the stuff that you want to be doing with a full caster, right? Sure, we sacrificed getting to those higher level spells, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th level spells, and delayed getting to even the 5th level spells, right? And that might not be worth it to you. But if you're looking for something that can do some decent damage, either in burst or sustainable form, while still holding on to a lot of really fantastic control, utility, and even support, then I think the Cantrip Blaster just might be for you. So that's the build for the week. I hope you enjoyed it. I had a blast. Oh boy. I had a lot of fun making this build. I really did. It was a fun brain teaser. But I also hope you know how much I love you. I really do. Thank you for all you do for me, for the channel. I hope you'll check out the other content here if you're not in the habit of doing so. But above all, I hope that you stay safe and that you be good and kind and happy, and that I see you again really soon. But until then, take care. Bye. Put your pinky rings up to the moon. What y'all trying to do? 24 karat magic in the air. Head to toe, so play. Bam, bam, bam. Man, I've had Bruno Mars songs stuck in my head like all week. Divide and conquer the enemy while we hate. While we hate. It's my birthday. No, it's not. Don't I look good though? Ha, ha. Which can be really pinch in a clutch. Which can be really clutch in a pinch. Girl, I love you. No, you don't. Never know, I might though. Can't say I won't. Say what you will about Bruno Mars. The guy puts on a show. Well, don't say that. Just don't even say that. Don't say that. Don't say that. Gosh, now I'm wondering. It would only have been a +6, but times. What's better, 4d12 or 12? 4d12 is better. Okay, don't say that. We're just a hair weaker. We're pretty much doing a little. We're pretty much. Ugh. Of course, in this outfit, I feel like I shouldn't be singing Bruno Mars songs. I should be singing something like, I'm a lumberjack and I'm okay. I work all night and I sleep all day. I cut down trees, I skip and jump. I like to press wildflowers.